For several days in a row, I've been suffering from insomnia. It's all because about a month ago, my dreams were filled with nightmares. In them, I plunged into a bottomless gaping chasm, shrouded in a veil of darkness and stretching for many miles. High above, cliffs and a narrow strip of crimson sky were visible. The bloody light faded with every new foot of descent. From the depths came a low, ominous rumble, and filled with gut-wrenching horror, I jumped in my bed. Every night, sinking deeper and deeper into the darkness, at some point the light almost faded, and then they appeared. Rustling sounds were heard from all sides, the low rumble turned into a growing howl, and the crimson glow broke apart under the pressure of darkness. Shadows were everywhere, performing some monstrous dance. They arrived in droves and began to torment my body. At first they just whizzed by, then the blows came, and eventually, it became torture. I tried desperately to scream, to resist, but the darkness was so thick that it filled my throat, and my limbs got stuck in it like clay. For some reason, I could not wake up. I could only squeeze my eyes shut and cover my face with my hands, and the howling in my ears reached an unprecedented intensity and tore my consciousness from within. It cost me a great deal of suffering to open my eyes that night in the darkness of the room. It was a long time before dawn, and all that time I lay dead pale and unmoving. The day passed under the weight of fatigue and chilling terror. One part of me urged me not to panic, to put it down to busyness and prejudice. But another part of me screamed at the imminent threat. The fear of sleep was colossal. But exhausted and giving in to the voice of reason, I carelessly lay down on the bed. And as soon as I plunged into sleep, the abyss opened up, rustling, and approaching roar could be heard. Since then, I haven't closed my eyes. The first day was difficult, but I managed to endure the night and overcome the urge to sleep. The memories of the horror experienced in nightmares were too fresh. In the morning, the fatigue suddenly receded, but a dull, aching pain appeared in my body, reminiscent of the pain from old scars. I decided not to leave the house for some time, citing illness. I wrote several letters to colleagues and acquaintances and, handing them over to the postman, walled myself off from the outside world. Given the abundance of free time, I began to keep a diary. On cold evenings, wrapped in a wool rug, I sat near the window on the second floor and silently watched the life of the tiny town. Given the abundance of free time, I began to keep a diary. On cold evenings, wrapped in a wool rug, I sat near the window on the second floor and silently watched the life of the tiny town. That night, however, something truly terrifying happened. They came straight from my dreams. I first noticed them when, in the light of the sunset, the shadow of the window frame suddenly turned black, stirred up, and lay back down in the same hour. I tried to convince myself that it was just my distorted mind, that apathy and a total lack of sleep were to blame. And just as I was about to succeed, I heard a sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Deep underground, from the very depths, there was a low, ominous rumble that I couldn't mistake for anything else. A low whispering sound followed immediately behind it, hiding in the cracks between the boards. The shadows echoed among themselves, howling deep in the basement, and the narrow corridors of my hovel seemed to grow several times darker. From then on, I never parted from the candle. The next day, despite my panicked fear of the revived nightmare, I dared to cross the threshold of my own house and see the doctor, but he was all but open-mouthed, claiming that he specialized only in physical ailments. When I told him about my pains, he examined me and concluded that there were no injuries. From then on, I was alone with the nightmare that my sick imagination had created. The shadows, sensing the hopelessness of my situation, began to act more and more unscrupulously every day. Every corner of the house was now covered with a web, woven of darkness blacker than the night itself. The rays of light near them wavered and flickered, The shadows of the objects deformed in the sunlight, hypertrophying and taking the most incredible shapes. But at least I was not touched, and I continued to drag out a miserable existence within the walls of the house, shaking at every rustle, until last night. Holding a candle in my hand, I sat at the window, enveloped in a lash of gloom. The storm was raging outside. The windows shuddered under the onslaught of the blizzard, rattling wildly against the wooden frame. A frantic roar echoed from the street. I sat in the chair, staring unseeingly in front of me, and I shuddered at every creak of the old cracked floorboards, as if in a trance. With the howling of raging currents, I sank too deeply into myself, regaining my senses only when the wax of the burning candle burned my fingers. With a shaking hand, I reached into the tin tray, where I had put a couple of new and used candles for the occasion. Empty, a cold sweat broke through my body in the blink of an eye. I was sure I still had enough left before the night was over, but what if I was completely out of touch with reality? What if I was stuck in my own fears, no longer able to distinguish between reality and fantasy? In any case, the candles must have been in the pantry. Shivering, I stepped slowly across the creaky boards. The candle flame fluttered, threatening to fade, and the edges of the tiny circle of light were encircled by shapeless black shadows. They grinned like wild dogs, waiting for the moment when their target would make a mistake, get set up, and they could attack it with the whole pack. I cheered myself up as best I could, saying that in the presence of light the shadows would not dare touch me. But in reality, I trembled at the mere sight of them and prayed to God for a quicker dawn. On the first floor, the blizzard greeted me with renewed vigor. I crept slowly toward the pantry, at the far end of the room. The flickering flames illuminated less than a foot on the floor already, and the faceless silhouettes approached me at arm's length. I clutched my eyes shut with fear and continued on my way, relying only on my hearing and my blind faith in the knowledge of my own house. At that moment, my heart was ready to jump out of my chest. Every second, I was expecting thousands of oblong, indefinitely shaped stumps to plunge into my body. And so, at last, I stood before the pantry door. With a trembling hand, I reached for the doorknob to find a new candle, and to have the miserable hope of another day lived under the terror of every occasional rustle, creak of the floorboards, or rumble of the wind. A sudden gust of frosty air through the crack under the front door blew out the light, holding back the shadows from absolute omnipotence.